Hey all, Jin here. This is my first attempt trying a Blizzard build, as usually I've done Fireball or Ball Lightning, so I wanted a bit of a change. Playstyle's pretty cool, and it's enough to take out the Ubers, clears all tiers of Nightmare Dungeons, and also handles the first couple of tiers of the Abattoir of Zir, no problem. If you enjoy these build videos, please leave a like and subscribe, as it helps the channel a lot. So thanks for watching, and now let's get to the build. So let's get to the skills. We're going to start with 2 in Firebolt. We're going to get 1 in Potent Warding, 5 into Ice Shards, and we're going to take the Greater Ice Shards. Then we're going to take 1 in Devastation, and 3 in Elemental Dominance. Then we come down here to our defensive skills. We're going to take 1 in Flame Shield, going for Mystical Flame Shield, 1 in Teleport, going for Shimmering Teleport, 3 into Glass Cannon, 1 into Elemental Attunement, 1 into Ice Armor with none of the other nodes, and then Frost Nova with Mystical Frost Nova. Then we come down to our Conjuration skills. We're going to take 1 in Align the Elements to get 3 in Mana Shield and 3 in Protection. We're going to take just 1 in Blizzard, and then we're going to get the Mage's Blizzard. We're also going to pick up 1 in Inner Flames, and 3 in Devouring Blaze. Then we're going to come down to our ultimate skills. We're going to take 3 in Permafrost, 3 into Hoarfrost, 3 into Frigid Breeze, and 3 into Icy Touch. And then we're going to take all the nodes in the Deep Freeze. And then for our key passive, we're going to take Avalanche. So there is one alternative for this skill tree here. If you find yourself always out of mana, you could take the 3 out of Elemental Dominance and the 1 out of Devastation and put that into Potent Warding, and the other 3 points into Fiery Surge. This will give you an extra 45% mana regeneration when you kill a burning enemy. Okay, that's about it for the skill tree. Pretty straightforward there for the Blizzard build. Now let's move on to the Paragon board. So for our first board, we're going to have the Tears of Blood glyph in here. And we're going to make sure we pick up all of the normal core stat nodes here to buff up the damage from this glyph. Then we go up to our second board here, which is the Icefall board. And we're going to put in the Flame Feeder glyph. This gives us bonus damage to burning enemies, as well as a 10% increased direct damage to burning enemies, and that's multiplicative. Our third board is going to be the Frigid Fate board, and we're going to put in the Stalagmite glyph here. So this is a huge bonus to our Ice Spike skill damage, and our Ice Spikes gain 10% critical strike chance. Then we go on to our fourth board, which is above the second board, and that's going to be our Enchantment Master board. And we're going to put the Control glyph in here. So that gives us damage to crowd controlled, as well as increased damage to slowed or chilled, and even more to stunned or frozen. Then we go to the right for our fifth board. That's going to be our Burning Instinct board. And we're going to put Destruction here as our glyph. Then for our sixth and final board here, we're going to put our Searing Heat board here. And we're going to slot in the Exploit glyph. This is going to give us a lot of extra vulnerable damage, as well as dealing damage to vulnerable enemies, increase our damage by 1% per 6 seconds, up to 10%. So it's pretty straightforward for the Paragon boards. If I did go a little fast, don't forget that everything is going to be in the build planner in the description below. Now let's move on to the enchantments. For our first enchantment, we're going to get the Ice Shards enchantment. So Ice Shards will automatically conjure and fly towards frozen enemies, which obviously is really handy. That's a lot of damage, as everything's going to be frozen by our Blizzard and or Frost Nova and Deep Freeze. And then for our second enchantment, we're going to get the Firebolt enchantment. So that's going to apply burning damage, which gives us a stack for our Rasha's ring, and also helps out with the Flame Feeder glyph and all of the rare nodes in the Paragon board that require burning damage to activate. So that's it for the enchantments. Let's get on to the vampiric powers. So for our Vampiric powers, we're going to need 6 packs of Ferocity, 8 packs of Divinity, and 2 packs of Eternity. For our first power, we're going to use Prey on the Weak. This just gives us increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and also makes enemies vulnerable while affected by a Vampiric curse from our other Vampiric powers. For our second power, we're going to take Metamorphosis. So when we evade, we turn into a cloud of bats and become unstoppable for 4 seconds, and also inflict enemies with Vampiric curse if they're on our path. Our third power is going to be Accursed Touch. So on lucky hit, we have up to a 44% chance to inflict Vampiric curse on enemies, and afflicted enemies have a 15% chance to spread it to other enemies. So this is a huge source of vulnerable coming out here. And then for our fourth power, we're going to use Domination, so we just deal increased damage to enemies who are stunned, immobilized, frozen, or feared. And if they're injured and non-elite, they're instantly killed. Then for our fifth and last power, we're going to use the Infection power. So hitting enemies with direct damage inflicts them with pox. Inflicting pox 8 times on an enemy expunges their infection and deals poison damage. So that's going to be another stack for our Rasha's ring. That's why we use this power. So that is it for the Vampiric powers. Let's move on to the gear. So on the left hand side of the screen here, I'm going to list the affixes you would want from best to worst. And let's start with the Helm. So for the Helm, you would want total armor, cooldown reduction, max life, and all stats. If you can't get those, you would look for intelligence or crowd control duration. As for the aspect, we're going to use ever living here, so we want to take that for the 25% less damage from CC'd or vulnerable enemies. Now, if you don't need the tankiness, or if you're doing Uber runs, then you would want to use a Godslayer crown. Definitely use this for Ubers. Next up, we have the chest piece, and we're going to want to get total armor percent, damage reduction from close, damage reduction from distant, and damage reduction. If you can't get that, then go for max life, all stats, or cold damage. As for the aspect, we're going to use Disobedience, so we gain an extra 1.1% in my case, increased armor for 4 seconds when you do any form of damage. So this stacks up to close to max, which is 66% in my case, very, very quickly. Next up, we have the gloves, and for these we're going to want critical hit chance, ranks into ice shards, attack speed, and all stats. If you can't get that, then look for intelligence, critical hit chance to injured, or lucky hit. As for the aspect, we're going to use Piercing Cold, which allows our ice shards to pierce 3 to 4 times and deal 25 to 20% less damage per subsequent enemy hit. Next up, we have the pants. We're going to use Tybalt's Will here. It's pretty much always best in slot pants for every build. That's just going to give us a huge amount of damage, maximum resource, damage reduction from close enemies, and some potion capacity, as well as an awesome aspect, which gives us 20 to 40% increased damage while unstoppable, and for 4 seconds after, so a huge source of damage there. And it also solves a lot of resource problems, because when we become unstoppable, we gain 50 of our primary resource. So if you can't get these, or don't have these yet, then you would use something with total armor percent, damage reduction from close, damage reduction from distant, and flat damage reduction. If you can't get those affixes, then you would look for max life, all stats, or intelligence. And for the aspect, you would use something like Snow Guards, so while within your own blizzard, and for 3 seconds after leaving it, you take 20 to 25% less damage. Next up, we have the boots. We're going to be using Esu's Heirloom here, so we're going to want this for the critical strike damage and mana cost reduction, as well as getting the unique aspect. Our critical strike chance is increased by 20 to 30% of our movement speed bonus. And these boots give a lot of movement speed bonus. As you can see, the flat movement speed after killing an elite, and evade grants us movement speed. So if you can't get these boots, then you would use boots with movement speed, mana cost reduction, all stats, and ranks into teleport or frost nova. If you can't get that, then something with intelligence or dodge percent. And as for the aspect, you would want to get something like Ghost Walkers, so while unstoppable and for 4 seconds after, you gain 10 to 25% increased move speed and can move through enemies. But definitely look for the Esu's Heirloom. So for the one-handed weapon, you're going to want a dagger if possible for the bonus damage to close enemies. And for the affixes, you're going to want to look for all stats, vulnerable damage, crit damage, and damage to close. If you can't get that, then look for intelligence or damage to chilled. And for the aspect, we're going to use the aspect of the frozen tundra. So while deep freeze is active, exploding ice spikes form in the area and deal cold damage. But also, our ice spikes have a 50% increased explosion radius, which is very useful, as we'll see in a second. So next up, we have the amulet. So for the affixes, we'll be looking for total armor percent, ranks into glass cannon, ranks into hoarfrost, and mana cost reduction. If you can't get that, then look for damage percent, cooldown reduction percent, or something like damage reduction from close or distant, or just normal damage reduction. As for the aspect, we're going to be using Glacial, so this is where a huge chunk of our damage comes from. When we cast Blizzard, it will periodically spawn exploding ice spikes that deal a lot of damage. So you want to get this number as high as possible on this aspect because it is a big chunk of damage. Our ice spikes also deal an extra 23% increased damage to frozen enemies. And thanks to the aspect we have on the one-handed weapon, the ice spikes also have a 50% increased explosion radius. So next up, we have the rings. For our first ring, we're going to want blue rose, so that gives us critical strike damage, a huge amount of ice spike damage, lucky hit chance, and mana cost reduction, as well as having the unique aspect, which is damaging an enemy, has up to a 30% chance to form an exploding ice spike, dealing an amount of cold damage, triple the chance if the enemy is frozen. And of course the ice spikes get the bonus from the weapon. For our next ring, we're going to have the Rasha's Iridescent loop, so this gives us a big chunk of non-physical damage, lucky hit chance, resource generation, and cooldown reduction. As well as this awesome unique aspect, for each type of elemental damage we deal, we gain 13.5% in my case, increased damage for 4 seconds, and whenever we deal any elemental damage, it refreshes all of the bonuses we have on. So this is very easy to stack up, and gives us a huge chunk of damage because of it. So if you can't get these rings, you would use something with critical hit chance, vulnerable damage, close damage, and resource generation. If you can't get that, you would look for crit damage or max life. As for the aspects, you would want to use Prodigy's Loop as the main aspect, and you would use Control as the secondary aspect. So Prodigy's Loop is using a cooldown, restores 15 to 25 mana, and Control is you deal 25 to 35% more damage to immobilize, stunned, or frozen enemies. But definitely try and get your hands on a blue rose and Tarash's Iridescent loop as fast as possible. For the loop, you would run a bunch of Varshans, it's not that rare of a ring, and for the blue rose, you would want to run Duriels. Last but not least, we have the offhand weapon, the Focus. So just like the main hand weapon, if I didn't mention, you want to look for as high an item power as possible for that high base damage per second. And as for the affixes, we're going to look for critical hit chance, resource generation, mana cost reduction, and cooldown reduction. If you can't get those, then look for all stats and intelligence. As for the aspect, we're going to use Conceited here, so we deal an extra 15 to 25% increased damage whilst having a barrier active. So pretty straightforward there, and that about wraps it up for all of the gear. And for the gems, we use the red gems in the armor, green gems in the weapon and offhand, and skulls in the jewelry. So as you can see, we have quite a lot of armor, good attack power, as well as decent resistances as well. Enough to get you through everything besides going deep into the Abattoir Vizier. So that was my Blizzard build. Thanks a lot for watching. If you liked this video or learned something from it, please leave a like and consider subscribing for more content like this in the future. So now I'll leave you with some gameplay from a tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon. Bye!